Thank you, everyone who's joining us. It's really a pleasure to be here and a privilege. I'm very happy that I was invited. So I was asked to say just a few words about myself. I was born in Israel. I'm Israeli, but I was born very far away from Judaism. Basically, all the hair that you see on the front of my face used to be on the back of my head. So I grew up my father called my home an ultra Orthodox secular home. That was my starting point, and it was a very interesting home, and it was full of culture and very, open to the world, to the winds of the world. And my father was a traveler. The house was full of artifacts from all over the world, but there was no Judaism. And in fact, if there was anything, there was a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment. But then I started on a long journey, as many people in our generation, and Baruch Hashem, the journey is still going on. I didn't, it wasn't through drugs or meditation or going to India or something exotic. I was just studying in the university, and I was fortunate enough to meet some very interesting people and very intelligent people, and gradually my head was open. My head and my heart began to open up to the beauty and wonder of the Torah, of Judaism, and now I'm trying to do my best to use the fact that I was born and raised far away from outside of Judaism. And clearly this was no error, this was no mistake. So my first question in many ways to Hashem was, why did you make it so that for the first 26 years of my life, I will grow up completely outside of Judaism? And the answer was that I need to be there in order to do some translating. And the translating is interpreting, connecting, bridging the two worlds of Judaism and modern secular culture. And that's what I try to do in my classes. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the meaning of the month of Av, which we have just entered yesterday. And we want to understand the meaning of the word Av and the meaning of the month Av, and especially how the properties, the characteristics of the month bear upon the very important day within Av, which is the 9th day of Av, the day of the Chorban, of the destruction of the two temples. And of course, how do we come out of that? How do we rebuild the temples? How do we rebuild ourselves, the Jewish people? So it's very famous that the sages say, Chazal say, Mishenichnas Av mema'atin besimcha. Once the month of Av opens, we need to diminish our sense of joy, not to be so joyful. And what's also quite known, but maybe less known, is the Hasidic take on this sentence, on this notion. For Hasidim, you should always be happy. You should serve Hashem with happiness, with joy all the time. There's no such thing as you should be less joyful. How can we accept this? So they take this phrase, mema'atin besimcha, which literally means have fewer or diminish or make smaller the amount of joy. And they say when Av comes in, we should be mema'atin, we should diminish. What should we diminish? Sadness, anger, hatred, all the klipot, all the external shells that cover our hearts, that cover our ears and eyes. And we should do so with joy. Mishenichnas Av mema'atin, we diminish everything that's negative, and we do so with joy. So either way, nothing has changed. We're always joyful. And in fact, I have a friend who, whenever it's the first day of Av, he starts singing Mishe, 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 Mishe. And he goes on and says, Mishe nichnas Av, Mema'atin besimcha. So that's a great new minhag that you can all adopt from now on. Just to show that we're always happy. It doesn't matter if it's Adar or it's Av. Jews should always be happy, and we should try and adopt a very positive, optimistic view of everything, even the negative aspects, even the things that have to do with exile and with destruction. That's what we want to do today. So let's start by looking a little bit at the word Av, the name of the month. So it's a very short name. It's 2 letters long. And it's not just 2 letters long, it's the first 2 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, right? It's Aleph and Bet. It's the first combination of 2 letters possible in the Hebrew language. We can do Aleph and Aleph, but that doesn't mean anything, and there's no connection of 2 different letters here. The first 2 letters that create a word would be Aleph Bet, and they create the word Av, father. Aleph is 1, the numerical value of Aleph is 1, the numerical value of Bet is 2. We can say that each one of us, we have our first person perspective. That's the 1, that's the Aleph. Each one of us is an Aleph. We say I and me. That's my Aleph, that's who I am. That's the first thing I can experience, is I know who I am. And then the 2, the Bet, that's the other person. The other person is the Bet. He's the second person, as in language, second person. You, when I address you, you are the second person in my life, whoever it is that I'm talking to. Together, if you put 1 and 2 together, you get 3. 3 would now be the third person. Who is the third person? The ultimate third person. That would be HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He, the Almighty One. He, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the third partner in creating life. When life is created, there's the first partner, then the second partner, it's the man and the woman, and the third partner who gives the soul, that's Hashem, and that He is the Father, He is the Av. So Av is a combination of Aleph, which is Ani, which is me, and Bet, which is the second person, which is you, and together it's 3, and it's the word Av, and that would be Hashem. Now, this combination of 2 letters, Aleph and Bet, is also very interesting, because it's the root, or we can even say the meta root, because in Hebrew, all roots have 3 letters. But roots also have roots. And really, each 3-letter root in Hebrew stems from an even more primordial or basic 2-letter root. So all the letters combined together create 2-letter roots. Av would be the first 2-letter root. And very interestingly, 2 basic words that are completely opposite come out of this one original first meta root, Av. The one is the verb ahav, le'ehov, to love, right? Ohev is lover, ahuv is someone who's loved. And another word that's very similar, very close, except the word, besides the word ahava, we can, right next to it, we can place the word eiva. Eiva is the opposite of ahava. Eiva is one of the Hebrew words for hatred. Oyev is an enemy. Ohev and oyev are very, very similar, very close. It's just 1 letter apart. They both come from this root av, both ahava and eiva, both ohev and oyev. Ohev and oyev is what you would use in Hebrew for what in English you would ask, is he a friend or a foe? So friend or foe in Hebrew would be ohev and oyev. So apparently there's something about the month of Av and the name of Av that places us right in the crossroads, choosing whether we see the other person, right? Because Av is Aleph and Bet, me and you, first person and second person. How do we treat the other person? Do we see him as a ohev or as a oyev? So that's the first thing to look at, and I'm just placing a few facts, a few characteristics for Av, and then we'll put them out together. The second interesting thing about Av is that the first day of Av, yesterday, it was Shabbat yesterday, Aleph Av is the Yortzeit, the day of passing of Aharon HaKohen, Aaron the priest. In fact, it's the only Yortzeit mentioned explicitly in the Torah. We don't know, according to the written Torah, when Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. We have we know from Chazal that it was Zayin Adar, same as his birthday, but it doesn't say so explicitly. We know the month in which Miriam passed away. We know it was Nisan, but we don't know which day it was. Again, we have traditions, but it doesn't say so explicitly. Aharon is the only person in the Torah that we know what their Yortzeit is. And in fact, it's not mentioned when he dies. He died in Parashat Chukat. And it would have made sense if then the Torah would have said that it was the first day of Av. But no, the Torah waited for the Parasha Mas'ei, which was what we read yesterday. And then we're told that it was the first day of Av. So, of course, Aaron is very much connected to Ahava. We spoke about Ohev and Oyev, friend or foe, loved one or hated one. Aaron was the greatest lover. He was a lover of peace, and he was a chaser of peace. He wanted to chase peace, not just love peace when it came his way. If things were peaceful, then he loved them. He would actively seek peace. He was a great lover, a lover of other Jews, a lover of other Jews loving each other, helping them love each other, helping couples reunite, helping friends reunite. So why is his Yortzeit mentioned in Mas'ei instead of in Chukat? Why did we read about it yesterday, several parashot after we read about his passing? So the answer that the Lubavitcher Rebbe gives is that Mas'ei is read it coincides with the 3 weeks of Ben HaMetzarim and with the actual first day of the month of Av. In our year, it was actually the very same day, because the Shabbat that we read, Parashat Mas'ei, was actually the first day of Av. It's not always exactly on the day, but it's always very close to that day. So the Rebbe says, when we are entering the month of Av, and the month in which the temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, senseless hate that had no purpose, no point, then we should all practice the very opposite, which is ahavat chinam. Ahavat chinam is senseless love, senseless acts of kindness. To love someone senselessly, even if they don't merit it, even if they can't find anything good about them, we should love them. So on the first day of Av, we need to remember Aharon, and that's why his Yortzeit is explicitly mentioned, and we hear about it just as the first day of Av is actually coming. So that's another important thing about this. By the way, if you take the word Aharon and you do the gematria, but you don't do the regular gematria, you do what is called small gematria. Small gematria is that if it's a 2-digit number, you just take away all the zeros. So Aleph is Aleph, it's 1, and Hey is 5, it's still Hey. But then Reish, which is 200, becomes just 2. And Nun, which is 50, becomes just 5. So if you narrow down Aharon to the basic gematria, the most basic gematria, you get Ahava. Because the first 2 letters are Aha, just as Ahava. And the second 2 letters narrow down, Reish and Nun become Bet and Hey. So Aharon is all about Ahava. That's what he is about. Another element about Av is that according to Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Formation, which is the most fundamental book in Kabbalah, each month has a sense. There are 12 senses, not just 5, not just 6. There are 12 senses according to Sefer Yetzirah, and it's very interesting to know them, and they all help us very much get a deeper understanding of the Hebrew calendar, the Jewish calendar each month. So 5 of them are the regular senses, and then the rest are unique senses. But in the case of Av, it's one of the regular senses. It's the sense of hearing. Tammuz was about the sense of seeing, and Av is the sense of hearing. Moving from Tammuz to Av, we move from the sense of sight, which is looking at the at the external appearance of things and trying to understand it, trying to get a good impression of things. We move from sight to hearing. Hearing is more internal than eyesight. If I see someone, I see their outside, and I can judge them by their cover, as we say, which is not a very good thing to do. Only once I start speaking to them and I start listening to them and hearing their voice do I get a glimpse of their inner world. Hearing is really listening to the inside of things. Even if you listen to music and you just listen to the outside of it, you're not really listening. You can also listen to someone speaking, but as you're listening, you're just waiting to give your pre-prepared answer. That's not listening either. Listening, true listening, rectifying the sense of hearing, is listening to the inside of things. It's going beyond face appearances, which is again eyesight, to what's going on the inside. And you have to listen. You have to truly listen. In Hebrew, we say lishma bekol mishu, to heed someone's voice. Then you can read it as lishma bekolo, what's within his voice. Lishma bekolo, it's not just listening to what he's saying, it's listening to what's inside his voice. That's true listening. This is what Av is all about. So if we take all of these elements together, we see that the message of Av is that we need to listen to the other person, and through this listening, find that he is really a ohev and not an oyev. That even someone who appears to be an oyev, an adversary, a foe, an enemy, I want to listen and I want to hear what's inside his voice. There has to be a spark of truth, a spark of godliness in his voice. I need to listen to it. By the way, another element of Av, just to put everything together, according to Sefer Yetzirah, it's not just that each month has a sense, it's also that each month has a letter. The letter of Av is Tet. Tet, the ninth letter. Tet stands for Tuv, goodness, good. And the shape of the letter Tet is like a vessel with like an arrow, small arrow pointing on the inside. So according to Kabbalah, the meaning of Tet, just as a letter, just as an icon, is that it points to a hidden good. There is a hidden good in everything. Tet is the first letter of Tov or Tuv, and there's a little arrow, 10 little line there that points to the inside of the vessel. So again, we have to listen to the other person. I'm the Aleph, he's the Bet. Together, only together can we create the Heavenly Father, the Av, the third person. And I have to listen to find the hidden good in the other person, and then he can become, from an enemy, from a foe, he can become a friend. So this in many ways is the art of hearing, or the art of listening, which we should say, because hearing is passive and listening is active. And we need to adopt active listening. And this is what Av is really all about. Av is not just hearing the other person or waiting for him to finish what he has to say so I can say what I want to say. It's about pausing and actively listening, and actively, just like Aharon was Rodef Shalom, a chaser of peace, we need to actively seek the hidden goodness within our enemies or our adversaries. Anyone we have an argument with. It could be someone from our family that we maybe have a quarrel between us and we have a disagreement, or maybe we stopped speaking. Maybe it's someone from an opposite group within the Jewish people, that they have totally differing opinions, and I can't see anything good about what they believe and what they think, and I need to try and do so. Or it could be just someone that I happen to dislike for some reason, and Av is a good opportunity to pause and reflect upon this and try and look at this from maybe another perspective, and listen more intently and more deeply into what they're about and what they're really trying to say. It could very well be that they're not expressing themselves very well. That's their problem. But my problem is that I'm not trying hard enough to listen beyond their possibly crude or blatant or the way that they're trying to express themselves. Maybe they don't know how to do it so well, but it's, again, that's not my job. My job is to try and listen beyond their words, even if they're not so wisely chosen. Sometimes I need to listen beyond their silence. If there are people who are silent, that they don't speak to me, then I need to approach them and try and hear them. Maybe they need help expressing themselves. So, looking at this idea that Av is about the art of listening and the art of creating dialogue, really, because that's really the name of this class. It's Geula as dialogue, Mashiach as dialogue. We can take this idea and look at the most famous story of one of the stories that's around the destruction of the temple. In several places in the Gemara, especially in the tractate Gittin, we have stories of destruction, Agadot HaChorban. And probably the most famous story is about Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. We now want to read just the beginning of this story and try and get a deeper understanding of it in light of everything we just said. So let's first remember what's going on in the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. So it starts with a certain person who's unnamed, could be anyone. And it is said that he had a good friend that he loved very much, whose name was Kamsa. And he had another person that he hated, that his name was Bar Kamsa. So first off, before we even go deeper into the story, we have exactly what we spoke about. We have this anonymous person who has a ohev, a loved one, and an oyev, a hated one. He's making this distinction. They're very similar names. One is called Kamsa, one is called Bar Kamsa. Maybe the second person is the son of the first person, who knows? We do know that his father had the same name as the first person, but it's unclear if they're related or not, but they have very similar names. And he really loves the first one, and he really hates the second one. What happens? He asks his servant. Interestingly, his servant does have a name. His servant is called Shma'aya. And Shma'aya has to do with hearing, the sense of Av. Again, very interesting connection. That's not usually pointed out. He tells his servant, I'm holding a big party. Please invite my good friend Kamsa. So Shma'aya is the servant, and he goes and he makes a mistake. He goes into the home of Bar Kamsa. He asks, where is Kamsa? Someone tells him someone leads him to the home of Bar Kamsa. He doesn't really care, he doesn't really notice those two letters. And he goes to Bar Kamsa and invites him. Bar Kamsa is very happy. He thinks maybe this other person is now wants to be my friend. So he comes to the party. The person inviting them to the party, he doesn't come in first. He wants to make an entrance. So all the guests come in and they're all seated. And at some point, once this host decides it's time to make his entrance, he makes his entrance, he comes in, and he surveys all the different guests sitting in his party. And who does he see? Oh no, it's his nemesis, his enemy, his hated one, Bar Kamsa. So he tells to Bar Kamsa, and he uses the third person, by the way. The third person, we mentioned before, could be something very high, could be Hashem, could also be a way of addressing someone with respect, like saying something like His Majesty, His Highness, His right, and so on. But here, it's used in the very opposite sense. It's used as it's a very cold, detached way of addressing him. And he says, well, here is my enemy, Bar Kamsa. Who is this but my enemy, Bar Kamsa, sitting here? So he addresses him in the third person. This is interesting. The third person could be something very, very it's almost like when you turn to a king or a queen and you say his or her majesty, you're using the third person. And really what you're doing is you're elevating, you're giving them some godly spark. That's really what you're doing, because kings that's what we believe, that they're appointed by God, by divine providence. So they have some godly spark that's maybe beyond other people. So by addressing them in the third person, it's like making them lofty. But we now see in this story that the third person language can also be used at the very opposite, to turn someone into an other, to push them away. I'm not addressing you in the second person, which is looking at you as a, we know that Buber had this concept that he said you can treat the other person as an it or as a thou. So thou would be you, would be the second person. And here, he treats the second person, Bar Kamsa, as enemy, not as a thou, but as an it, which is a very negative thing. So he turns to us, who is here but my enemy Bar Kamsa? And says, please go out, get out of here. So it's just in front of everyone. So Bar Kamsa says, please, I am willing to pay for the meal, but don't push me away. And he says, no, go out. And he says, I'm willing to pay more, and he increases the amount that he's willing to pay. And the host is unforgiving. And ultimately he says, go out. And Bar Kamsa comes out very humiliated. And then he says, all the most important people in Jerusalem, this is all taking place in Jerusalem, all the most important people in Jerusalem were there, and they did not object. None of them raised their voice and spoke and said, this is not fair, this is not appropriate, this is not polite, and come on, let him stay. No one said anything. They were all quiet. So I'm going to take my revenge on all of them. And then he goes to the Caesar of Rome, and he really starts convincing him that the Jewish people are rebelling against him. And he really causes the Caesar, the emperor, the Roman Empire, to go and attack the Jewish people. This is the story. It's a longer story. It's more complicated, but that's the beginning of the story. So we want to now go a little bit deeper into the story and the names. We don't have the name of the host. We do have the names of the two people, the friend and the foe, and we do have the name of the servant. So let's look at what he says here. So just yesterday, I came across this very interesting essay by an Israeli Rav called Shimon Klein. And he gave a very original explanation for the names Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, which I never came across. So he says, what does it mean, Kamsa? Kamsa, the aleph at the end, that's just an Aramaic suffix. All male Aramaic nouns end with the aleph. So what is kamat? Kamat is a verb, and the verb means to close down tightly. That's likmot. And for example, the priest, in one of the works that the priest does in the temple, is that he takes some incense and he's doing a kmitza with his hands. One of the fingers is called a kmitza, because you close down something. The most famous Hebrew word that uses this root is kamtsan. Kamtsan was someone who's cheap, miserly. Why? Because he closes his hand. So even the nikud, kamatz, which is pronounced as either u or o, is called this way because the lips become closed and condensed when you go or u, as opposed to patach, which is another nikud, which is a, and then the lips are opened. So kamatz means to close. So this Rabbi Shimon Klein's interpretation, very beautiful. It goes like this. It says, Kamsa was someone who became consciously closed himself up to one perspective. He had a few perspectives. He lived in a generation that you could see there was a lot of arguments about what is the right path to go in Judaism, or maybe it was Hillel versus Shammai. It could have been many, many things. And he listened to all the opinions, and he says, I'm going in this direction, and that's what I'm closing myself up. Sometimes it's a good thing to close yourself up, because sometimes you need to make up your mind. And you need to take a side in an argument. It's a good thing. Sometimes that's what you need to do. So, but the thing is that Kamsa had a choice. Kamsa listened to all the opinions, and he says, I'm going in one direction, and I'm closing myself in that direction. So obviously the truth is many facets and many sides, but I'm taking one side. That's not a bad thing in itself. Bar Kamsa is the second generation of those people who took one side and decided the other side was false. The second generation are people for whom they're not aware, they're not really open to having another perspective. That's the second generation of the people who chose one aspect of the truth or one aspect of reality or one perspective of looking at things and went for it. And their children or the next generation grow up within that closed environment, and they take the truth to be the only truth there is, and they don't know the other perspective. We know this in our generations from both sides of the Dati Chiloni chasm within the Jewish people. How do we know this? So let's start with the Chiloni side, the secular side. The first secular generation were people who grew up in yeshivot. They knew a lot of Torah, they knew a lot of Jewish wisdom, they knew a lot of Tanakh, they knew a lot of Chazal, they knew a lot of things. But then they lost faith for some reason. It was the age of enlightenment, of Haskalah. They were drawn to the universities. They felt that Judaism doesn't really contain everything that the modern world is offering. Whatever happened, they decided to distance themselves from Judaism. They were the Kamsa of the secular world. But they knew, and you can see in their literature and in their poetry and in their speeches and in their thought that they wrote in their essays, that they knew a lot of Yahadut, a lot of Judaism, a lot of Yiddishkeit. They were immersed. They had an observant father and a grandfather, and they knew a lot of things to know. And then, to their own surprise and dismay, the next generation, and this is increasing the more the generations pass, are people who have no idea what Judaism is all about. And the most famous sentence said by a famous Israeli politician who was very secular, very left-wing. He was in the party of Mapam, which was one of the party led by Ben Gurion. He said a very famous sentence. He said, we wanted to raise a generation of epikorsim. An epikorus in Judaism is someone who knows the Torah but rebels against it, pushes it away. He doesn't want to observe it, but he knows it. It's very hard to find a real epikorus because he really needs to know a lot. But anyway, that's what we wanted. We were secular, we knew the Torah, and we wanted not to observe it. We wanted to raise a whole generation of epikorsim that, like us, knew Judaism and rejected it. But we ended up, says this saying, we ended up creating a generation of Amei Aratzot. Amei Aratzot are just ignoramuses, are just people who have no idea about Judaism. They know nothing. And of course, he was dismayed by this. He was disappointed. He said, that's not this kind of secular society I wanted to raise. People who just grow up watching American television or grow up on Hollywood or on just Western, culture. Not just Hollywood, could be literature, it doesn't matter. But they don't know anything about Judaism. So we wanted to raise a generation of epikorsim, and we raised a generation of Amei Aratzot. So this is a Kamsa looking at the next generation who are Bar Kamsa. The sons, Bar is a son, right? They're the sons of the Kamsa, they're the next generation. They're really closed up. We see the exact same thing in Ba'alei Tshuva society. Ba'alei Tshuva, people who grew up secular and then discover the Jewish world. So they grew up with a lot of broad education. They read a lot of books. They know science. They know art. They know about a lot of things. But then they realize it's all really incomparable to the beauty and depth and holiness of the Torah. And really they're disappointed with this very open world that's too open. It's so open and there's no depth to it and there's no commitment. And then they become Baalei Tshuva and they start to study Torah and they raise their children in a Dati in the tea environment and in the tea schools. But then what happens is to those Baalei Tshuva, they suddenly realize that I chose Judaism because I had a lot of options, and I could read and learn about a lot of things. And now my children, I can't recognize them because they're only into Judaism. They don't know. For them, it's obvious. That's all they know. And so this dynamic of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa repeats itself regardless of what we're talking about. So how does this have to do with the story? In our story, this anonymous host loved Kamsa, but he didn't love Bar Kamsa, which means, and this is interesting, because the fact that he didn't love Bar Kamsa suggests that even the Kamsa that he did love was not of his group. Because otherwise, he would have loved the Bar Kamsa also. The Kamsa was from the opposite group. This host thought of himself as loving the other. He loved the Kamsa, who was his opponent in some ideas, but he was an opponent that he could handle, he could deal with. So he said, I'm a very open person. I love Kamsa, who, although he thinks other than me, I'm a very open person. I invite him to my party. But that's easy loving Kamsa. Loving Kamsa is easy because Kamsa is open-minded relatively. He consciously closed himself up to one thing, but he's still knowledgeable about the other perspective. You can hold a conversation with him. But the Bar Kamsa, him I can't stand. There's no talking to him. He's so closed up, I can't stand him. So I love the other, but only to a certain degree. That's what comes out of the story, according to this interpretation by Rabbi Shimon Klein. Very, very, very beautiful and interesting. I love the other group. I can deal with the other groups as long as they're not extreme. If they're extreme, I can't talk with them, and I'm not inviting them, and I'm pushing them away. But the thing is, the next generation is always more extreme. And the big test is not with the Kamsa, it's with the Bar Kamsa. And not only that, because they're extreme, if you push them away, they're going to kick back hard. That's what happens with Bar Kamsa, the younger one. He says, I'm not invited, I'm pushed out, nobody's letting me in, I'm going to show them what it is to be pushed away. And I'm going to turn to Caesar, I'm going to do crazy things. It's unexpected. Why? Because he wasn't invited. He wasn't included. He wasn't given room. He wasn't given place. So really this story is about learning to really push the boundaries of what it means to listen to the other side. If you're just listening, it's like a Dati person who's only willing to speak. So let's go the other way. It's like a Chiloni person who's only willing to speak to religious people, Datiim, if they're very, very modern or very, very open. But he wouldn't go to speak to the really ultra Datiim, right? Or it's like the Dati wanting to speak to the Chiloni who is very open to Judaism, but he wouldn't speak to the far away Chiloni with the tattoos and the whatever. That's really far away. No. I'd like to speak to the Chiloni that's open to the team. That's the easy. That's not being a Rodef Shalom. That's being a Ohev Shalom, but not a Rodef Shalom. It's a lover of peace, the peace that comes your way, that peace that's easy to make. But loving the far left or the far right or the far Dati or the far Chiloni, that's the challenge. That's the real challenge. But it's vital that we do so. It's really vital because the people are there at the extreme because they're not listened to. Now this brings us to the other character in this story, which is Shma'aya the servant. Shma'aya, whose name we are given for no reason. It would have made more sense for the host, who's much more of an important figure in the story, that we should have his name. And Shma'aya, who cares about the servant? And also the servant appears as someone who's very confused because he was sent to Kamsa and he went to Bar Kamsa and he doesn't really pay attention. But we can suggest another explanation, that Shma'aya was very clever, or at least subconsciously or superconsciously, he meant for this to happen. Shma'aya means that he is listening, Shomea, Shma, right? Like the sense of hearing that we want to rectify in Av. And he listens to Yud, Hey, Yud Hey are the two letters that make up the first half of God's name. It's one of God's names in itself. Shomea Yudke. Yudke is the two aspects of godliness, and also it's the two letters that distinguish the words Oyev and Ohev. Oyev and Ohev they start with the Aleph Bet that we spoke about, and then in Ohev you have the Hey, and in Oyev you have the Yud. And Shma'aya says, really what he's saying, consciously or unconsciously, is I want to teach you, my master, to listen to both. You want to listen just to the one you love, and you don't want to listen to the one you don't love. But I am Shma'aya. I listen to the Yud and the Hey, to the Oyev and the Ohev. And that's why he made this mistake. Again, an actual mistake, a providential mistake, it doesn't matter. Shma'aya was the messenger to bring about this situation in which not just the loved one was invited, but the hated one was invited, thus challenging his master to listen to the one that he hates, that he's used to hating. So this is the basic story. And what we learn from this is that rectifying the destruction of the temple, because this is a story about the destruction, what caused the destruction, is going in the opposite direction. It's not sinat chinam, it's ahavat chinam, which is really honing the art of listening and the art of dialogue. The word Mashiach can also be read as Messiach. Messiach is talking. Someone who's talking, also causing others to speak. From the word Sicha. Sicha is a conversation. Messiach is someone who would come and help us talk to one another and listen to one another. And if we want him to come, we need to start practicing. And we need to start showing him that we're into this idea of really holding a conversation. You can say that really all of Judaism rests upon the foundation of a dialogue. It starts with the dialogue between God and man, or God and the Jewish people. He gives us the Torah from above to below, and then we start learning the Torah and creating the oral Torah from below to above. It actually starts in our Parashat Dvarim, when Moshe is now repeating what he learned in the Torah from his own mouth, using his own words. That's where the dialogue begins. And it continues in the entirety of the oral Torah. And then there's the dialogue between the sages within the Bet Midrash of the oral Torah. There's Hillel and Shammai and all the couples and all the wise men, all the 70 wise men, and all the different Tanaim and the Moraim. It's a dialogue. You have to listen to both sides. And of course, there's the dialogue between a man and a woman as they get married. And it's all reflected in the two keruvim, the two cherubs, in the Holy of Holies. And in many ways, all of us are a bit of a Kamsa. And it's not bad to be a Kamsa. Kamsa means you have your opinion. You take a side. You have a perspective. That's okay. You want to listen to all sides, and then you want to take a side. But then you want to continue listening to the other sides and try and make sure that the next generation is not like Bar Kamsa. And if they do end up like Bar Kamsa, then you need to invite them and hold them in and listen to them and hear them out. And then create this intergenerational balance. And really what happens is the more we go through this dialogue, what does a dialogue do? What does a conversation do? It makes our perspective more multifaceted, richer. The more everyone has what is called in psychology a confirmation bias. We're biased towards ideas that confirm what we believe in. That's a given psychological fact. Doesn't matter where you are in the political, sociological, religious spectrum. We all have a confirmation bias. We like to hear people that we agree with, and we dislike listening too much to people we disagree with, because it threatens us. A dialogue challenges our confirmation biases and helps us create a more complex richer, multi-perspective view of things. And a dialogue is something that evolves and continues. And even if you don't reach full agreement, the fact that you make your perspective, that you soften it, that you round it out, that you qualify it, that you're able to contain at least an element of the other person's perspective, that means we've all advanced, and the dialogue can advance. It's not it's not like two people shouting at each other. Once you start listening and addressing what the other person is saying, and really this is how God Himself and Mashiach Himself are able to be revealed. God is infinite, and His infinite light is reflected in the multitude of perspectives that there are in the world. And the more we listen to other perspectives, and the more we strive to listen in, to tune in to the spark of truth, that at the very least a spark of truth, and possibly more than that, exists in whatever they're saying, then the more we really reveal to our eyes the full nature, the full infinite nature of God, of godliness. And so this is, I think, a good message to enter the month of Av with. And may we all have a wonderful, good, happy month in which we can diminish and make smaller all the animosity between us, the eiva, and fight it in our hearts and in our ears to love each other more. Hi, if you enjoyed this class, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, also make sure to click the bell icon. To keep the classes flowing and free of charge, please consider supporting us on Patreon, an amazing platform for supporting independent creators. You're also welcome to join our weekly live Zoom class every Sunday evening, Israel time. You can find all the links in the description below. Thank you very much, keep healthy, and see you soon.